Howdy and welcome to the F1 Hatchet. This is the 2023 Bahrain review/reaction. This is the first race of the F1 2023 season. This had a lot of hype trying to figure out the layout of the drivers and constructors and how they compare to each other, as we've only had a few testing before this to see and guess see if anybody's sandbagging or see if anybody's having more trouble than they are expecting to have. This race was a fairly boring race if you're considering just the leader of the race, kind of walking away with this race without any trouble. But the mid-pack was kind of congested and had a pretty good back and forth throughout this race, that's made this race a little bit better than it should have been. And then you had some people at the back that were unexpectedly out of the race. And so we will start off the review as normal with the back of the field and work our way to the front. As you can see here, Oscar Piastri started off in 18th position after qualifying and was the first DNF for the race. He had an electrical issue that brought him out on lap 16. Charles Leclerc was the second DNF. He qualified third and ended up 19th because of an engine issue. He was able to pull over on the side of the track on lap 41 that caused a virtual safety car to come out for a few laps while they pulled that vehicle off the racing track. So he really had a horrible race. I mean, I know he wasn't expecting to be on the top, but I know he was wanting to be at least in that section of the finishing results with possibly trying to push a little bit on the Red Bulls. But unfortunately, Charles ended up finding himself, in the pits with that vehicle issue. Hopefully they can resolve that without any too much trouble and have a more reliable car in the future. Esteban Ocon had a horrible race. He ended up gridding on the start of the race for the start, just slightly to the right, which gave him a 5-second penalty. Then when they incorrectly served that penalty, he got another 10-second penalty due to having a engineer touch the car slightly before the 5-second penalty was finished. But then he made it worse by getting another 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. He ended up finally just dropping out of the race on lap 43. Lando Norris had a horrible race in his own regard. He had a pneumatic issue that they kept trying to pump up during pit stops, which took longer than normal pit stops, which kept him pushed back into the back of the field. He basically used this as a training or learning session for McLaren to try to figure out what they can do to help speed up that McLaren as it's having more issues. He had about 7 pit stops overall throughout this race, so not the race in any kind of regard for Lando Norris. Juan Yuzhou was probably the back of the field true racing in this lineup. He did not have a great race, but he did end up with the fastest lap. And since he wasn't in the top 10, he does not get a point, but he does take that point away from that first group, which allows Alfa Romeo to maybe snag that in the future and get some more closer to that field. Next, we have Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified 10th and ended up 15th. He had a front wing end plate damage on the start of the race. Strangely enough, they waited to the second pit stop before replacing that front wing. I'm not sure if that was due to concerns of being overtaken or what in the pits, but that pushed him back farther in the field as that balance for that Haas was not as what Nico was looking for or had experienced in testing or qualifying. So that pushed him back into the back of the pack. Not the greatest for Nico Hülkenberg, but he also, on top of that, was ahead of Nick de Vries, but had a 5-second penalty for going beyond track limits one too many times. And even after that black and white flag, did that and got that penalty. So he got pushed back a little bit farther than he should have been. Learning experience, and it's still good to have him back in the pack trying to race on a full-time gig instead of just jumping in here and there. Next, we have the not rookie, Nick DeVries in the AlphaTauri. Qualified 19th, worked his way up to 14th. I don't have a whole lot for him in regard, but generally a pretty good race for those AlphaTauris. I don't think they're in the top for that car. They needed a lot of work to try to get them more competitive to that mid-pack. Then we have the other Haas in Kevin Magnuson, qualified 17th. Said he had ran into traffic on that qualifying, so it pushed him back. Didn't quite get to that Q2 mark that maybe have let him get farther up in the field. He is the only one to start off the race on hards and kind of had the reverse strategy for that, but did not seem to help him overall, but did improve over that 17th position to third. Haas did have a double stack when that virtual safety car came out for Charles Leclerc pulling over to the side of the track. So they got a little bit of experience in the pits for having that double stack. So we'll see if that pays off in the future. Now we have Logan Sargent, who qualified 16th and worked his way up to 12th. I was really impressed with the Williams. I always thought the Williams were going to be at the very back of the field, but they seem to be closer to that mid-pack in the middle, fighting for that front line of that mid-pack. So we'll see how they can progress on. I do have that Logan had a pretty good start over having 3 spots in the start of the race that helped him progress into that 12th position. Yuki Tsunoda didn't have the greatest race, but overall it was a fairly good race, considering that AlphaTauri is not the best as it should be. He qualified 14th and ended up 11th. He did have a nice pass with Juan Yuzhou and Nick DeVries, one spot for 11th, where he ended up due to, Nick DeVries trying to hold back Juan Yuzhou, which kind of caused some of that lag that allowed him to get both of those vehicles at once. That wraps up the bottom half of the grid. We will now go to the top 10. We have Alex Albon, who again had a good start. He qualified 15th and ended up into the points in 10th. He had a chance for 9th, but Pierre Gasly kind of was able to overtake him on lap 43 for that position. But anyway, it's still good points for Williams to start off the season with points when they weren't really expecting to be in that regard. So I think they were trying to use this as more of a learning half of the season to try to push them into that mid-pack. But it looks like they are pretty good in that, so hopefully they can make strides and be good founders in that mid-pack and even fight for that front of that mid-pack region. I do have that Alex Albon had a good start and had gained 3 spots on that front start of the race. Pierre Gasly and that Alpine that he moved to got points for that, and that was fairly good since his teammate was having such a bad day. He qualified 20th, had a horrible qualifying session, which didn't look very good on him, but he was able to pull that 20th position all the way up to 9th, which is a really good spot for him, overtaking that many vehicles on track and in the pits, in that pit strategy, leaving him in with some good points for Alpine. I do have that he overtook, as I said, that 9th position from Alex Albon on lap 43 that helped him gain that extra point. Valtteri Bottas in that Alfa Romeo qualified 12th, ended up 8th. He had a pretty standard race. He was the starter for this grid, who overtook 4 spots on the start, bringing him up into the top part of the field, but then due to strategy and that vehicle was pushed back down to 8th. But still a good start and then top of the rest of those customer Ferrari teams. Now we have George Russell, who qualified 6th, ended up 7th, 1 spot behind for the Mercedes. He tried to undercut Stroll on a pit stop and did so. Got out in front of Stroll, but didn't have the momentum to keep that position. So he lost that position on 32, which pushed him back into that 7th position. Lance Stroll, with his injury, those broken wrists, did an excellent job, I think, of getting up to 6th. He qualified 8th. Get really good points for Aston Martin. He, fought pretty good with Alonso at the start of the race. Actually ended up running into the back of Alonso at one point, which caused some controversy on if he was still able to handle that vehicle with that injury he has, but he ended up proving them incorrect as he was able to finish in 6th. He also passed George for that last position, as I said, due to George going into the pits and didn't have quite the heat in that tires to be able to hold Lance Stroll off. So a little bit of miscalculation on Mercedes, but it was a good opportunity for them to try to push and keep that 6th position. Then we have Lewis Hamilton, who qualified 7th and ended up 5th. I know it wasn't the position that he was really looking for in Mercedes, trying to get back into those winning ways, but he did have a lot of fun, he said, in the race, battling out with Alonso and Stroll and George and all of those folks, having to do a little bit more actually racing instead of being out in the front. I have him having a nice fight with Alonso for 5th position, where Lewis ended up after Alonso passed him between laps 36 and 39, going back and forth a few times, trying to fight off each other and coming back a little bit. So that was a nice view for Lewis Hamilton, and had a pretty good time, even though he's not at that front of that pack that he wants to be. Now we get to Carlos Sainz, who qualified 4th, ended up 4th. He got a pretty good start, but lost 3rd to Alonso on lap 46. And he had to keep those tires, as he was saying that he didn't have the degradation over those tires wear to be able to really push and try to defend against Alonso. So he kind of dropped back, trying to save as many points as he could for Ferrari, especially after his teammate was able to have a DNF because of a reliability issue. So they ended up with a 4th spot for 12 points. So not the greatest position for Ferrari, but still a decent start comparatively where they could have been if they had some other issues. Then the surprise of the day, or hype train of the day that ended up fairly well, was Fernando Alonso, who qualified 5th and ended up 3rd. He had fights with Russell for 5th position on lap 13. He passed Bottas for 6th on lap 17 after he pitted. He fought his way back up through Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, getting his way back into that 3rd position after Charles dropped out and couldn't keep that 3rd position. So then we get to the Red Bulls. We have Sergio Perez, who had a bad start. So he basically dropped back into the field, but was able to come back and take that 2nd position on lap 26. Basically was able to, I think, just hold at that point due to that first fight, dropping those tires off and pushing him back into that strategy. But still fairly, well ahead of Fernando at that point at the end of the race, about 10 seconds, I believe. And then, of course, you have Max Verstappen, who qualified first and ended up winning the race with a breeze. He had a great start, took the lead, kept the lead from the beginning, and just ran away with it. He was 4 seconds ahead of the second place by lap 6, and I have him like 13 seconds ahead of that second spot by the half of the race, where he just was basically putting it into cruise control and running around. He did hear some chatter about having some shifting issues when he was downshifting, locking up the rear tires. So his question is that going to be any kind of trouble for him or not in the future, or are they going to be able to have work that way out? Who knows? That is a little bit of sign for hope for if you're not a Max Verstappen fan or want a little bit better race in that front position in the future. But at this point in time, Red Bull is running away with things in the future. We will see as they have that limited aero time that they can spend. So can the other field use that time wisely and make up that gap to have a fight for the front? We will have to find out in future races. So now we come into the driver's standing, which is usually go through this and figure out where people have improved or are dropped behind other. But as this is the first race of the season, we basically have the lineup for the race win. So we have Max Verstappen leading the driver's standings with 25 points. Unfortunately, there's not that off point as Juan Yuzo had that fastest lap, so it took it away. So we have the standard lineup for the finishing of the race. And then we have the constructor standings. So we have Mercedes, Haas, and AlphaTauri with 0 points, and Williams coming in with that 1 point, starting off the season fairly well, gaining that point. So we'll see if they can progress into that upper mid-pack as the season progresses. We have Alpine with 2, Alfa Romeo with 4, Ferrari with 12, Mercedes with 16, and then of course you have Aston Martin with 23, and Red Bull, toning it out with that 1-2 with 43 points. So as you can see, this was the standard race, and we will see how things progress in the future. We have 2 weeks, and then we will be back in Saudi Arabia, I believe, for the next race, and see how, if any changes will happen before then, if they can make those tweaks to help the teams go through. Until then, I will see you on the grid.